16th chapter, and we're down to the question number 30 in that particular chapter, and this is, of course, on page 29. And the question asks this simple question: show from verse 27 that mischief is worthless. How would you answer that question, that mischief is worthless? It doesn't accomplish anything good. Absolutely not. And of course, it only ultimately makes problems for the individuals that are involved in it and anybody else that has to do with that. And and the illustration, the comparison is made to a fire, of course, and that just simply means that while here a fire can be and can work out for benefit, but it can cause destruction too if the motivation behind it's not what ought to be, for sure. And that's the way it is with mischief. We have a world that's filled with that type of mentality, sadly. Number 31, what kind of man is the perverse man described in verse 28? What are some of the characteristics? He doesn't tell the truth. He's a coward, and so he's whispering his cowardly ways, and the desire he has is to separate friends. And of course, you know that sometimes they're successful in being able to do that by not telling the truth. Number 32, what might be the enticements of verse 29 include? What would be some of the things that would fit into that category? Do what? Alcohol. All right. Any type of ill-gotten gain, slander, threats of violence. Here again, we're talking like the front page newspaper in the United States of America today. Number 33, what is meant by shutting the eyes and moving the lips in verse 30? Now, it sort of seems odd to a degree, but here it's simply saying that even if you don't say something, then by the expression on your face or your gestures, then you're expressing something. So you got to be careful. And of course, we saw this all the way back with that sorry woman trying to take advantage of the young, naive man, taking him with her eyelids. She didn't have to say a word. She just fluttered them eyelids, and swept him right off of his feet. Number 34, what is a hoary head? It's an older person, and of course, the hoary head is a reference to white, the white-headed. Now, I never will, and it's genetically, I don't guess I'll ever be considered wise because I'm not developing gray hair quickly. But I ain't got nothing to do with me. It's just the way it is. So I'll not ever get the respect that I deserve as an old man as long as my hair keeps on staying black. Do what? That's right. Give it time. It'll come, baby. Number 35, what virtue is praised in verse 32? Patience. If a person is patient, possesses self-control, slow to anger, long-suffering, then that's the type of person that is deserving to be praised for sure. And then question number 36, what is meant by the lot being cast into the lap? It's not something that we normally do today, but the idea is, of course, is that some things in our inability as human beings to figure out, then we have to give it into the hands of God. And of course, there's been many instances in which men, knowing they didn't control the matter, have given it over to, perchance, as they would consider it. But yet, in many instances, it was through the casting of lots that God designated who He wanted to be in that position. And but we're outside of that period of time which that happens now. A lot of people think when they buy a lottery ticket that they're waiting on the Lord to make the right choice, for them. Of course, that's not the case at all. All right, chapter 17. What does quietness stand for here in this particular verse? Peace. Here's a contented atmosphere, domestic peace. That's something to be desired for sure. And in a situation like that, if you don't have very much at all to eat, maybe a box of Post Toasties is better off than if you've got a big old spread of food. Number 2, what are the two contrasts in verse 2. You got a wise servant that is in contrast with a foolish and a wicked son. Okay? And the wise servant or the wise slave is going to be the one who rules and inherits, while the foolish son is not. And of course, there have been some situations down through history that would sort of lend themselves to this idea. Remember, it was Abraham who considered that it was impossible for him to have a child, and so he ends up making his servant, his slave, makes him the inheritor of his things, of course, in Eliezer of Damascus. And so he was a steward in that case. All right. Number 3, what does the Lord do when he tries people's hearts? He tests it. The idea of trying there is he tests their character, see what they're made out of. And of course, sometimes it's in difficult situations that our true character then is on display. And sometimes it's not that pretty to see, and sometimes it is. Number 4, what will a liar give? Why will a liar give heed to a naughty tongue? Well, it's sort of like you run with the same crowd that you are, you know. I mean, here a person feels in good company with a person who is guilty of speaking that way. A drunk likes the fellowship of other drunks. The liar likes the fellowship of other liars. The pothead loves the fellowship of other potheads. So that's the principle there. Number 5, what are some common examples that we're aware of now when a person laughs at a calamity? Yeah. Now, if it's on the opposite team, you know, and say they intercept the pass and they run, they start celebrating, and then they fumble out of bounds and they don't get the touchdown, then that's not really a terrible calamity, but you have the tendency sometimes to rejoice at the failings of somebody else if they happen to be on the opposing team, for sure. But laughing at or making light of what another person faces is certainly not a godly characteristic, for sure. You know, every time that I've ever run out of gas or every time I ever had a flat, it seemed as though everybody that went by was laughing at me, you know. And of course, the wife and the kids in the car was hollering at me because they told me to get gas before we left, and I thought we had plenty, so it wasn't going to be a problem. Number 6, who reproacheth whose maker? All right, if a person is mocking the poor, he is, in fact, showing disgust for the God who is the God of justice and is the poor man's God too. Number 7, what is meant in verse 6 by the glory of children or their fathers? That sounds sort of backwards than what we usually think. But the idea is, of course, is that good children not only respect their parents, but they are a glory to their parents. They bring great pride and joy because of that. And now the thing is, you can take it to the extreme that you start trying to boast of your own goodness because of the goodness of a forefather, which is ridiculous because it doesn't have anything to say about you, for sure. There's been many a good person who had a rotten kid, but that's not what's under consideration here. What is excellent speech? Speech that is what? It's true. It's factual. It's based upon reality. Number 9, what does becometh mean? So that's very becoming on you. It fits. It's a characteristic of it. It just goes along with it. So true, fact-filled speech doesn't go along with a fool, obviously. Nor, as the comparison continues, nor a person in a position of power and prestige, lying lips don't go along with that either. If you got a lying person who's in a position of authority, then you got a problem, for sure. Number 10, what is the meaning of a gift is a precious stone to the possessor? All right, of course, a precious stone, obviously, is a valuable commodity, and there's 2 possibilities here, at least in the way that I look at it. Here's one possibility. the person who offers a bribe gets things through it, or the one who gives a gift gets things through it. You know. Now the person that gets the gift, he obviously gets something, but in a negative connotation would be giving priority to the person who gives the bribe. And of course, there again, that reads like almost today's paper too. So what is the it, number 11, that we're talking about here? The it is the bribe or the gift. You know, it's not just like, oh, it's your birthday. No, you got an ulterior motive for this present that you're providing. Number 12 covers his or somebody else's transgression. Well, here it's as reference to the other person's transgression. And of course, you know, more than likely you would say here's somebody that you're close to, maybe a friend that you are seeking to assist, possibly. Number 13, what is repeateth a matter? It's more than just what we commonly refer to as gossip. Here, the idea is you keep on bringing it up over and over and over and over, even if it's right. Is there anything really beneficial if you just keep on bringing it up over and over and over again and think that by repeating it, somehow it's going to change anything? Well, not necessarily. It's not. Now, as far as, you know, rebuking a sinner, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about simply bringing up something that maybe elevates ourselves by saying it and brings somebody down that we want taken down a notch or two. Maybe would be our motivation for that. Number 14, what will help a man if 100 stripes won't? Well, nothing, but who's are we talking about here? We're talking about the foolish man. You know, a person that can take reproof, that can be rebuked, is the person that wants to do better. But sometimes a person doesn't have any desire to do better. I mean, how many times do we see that demonstrated by a person who, within a couple of days of getting out of jail, gets stuck right back in jail for doing the same thing got them put in there the first time? You know, well, that's a foolish person that would end up doing the exact same things all over again. All the reproof, all the jail time, all the whatever is done in their behalf, for sure. And of course, was Peter made better by being rebuked? Well, sure. So he wasn't a fool. You know? A person that is not benefited by rebuke is a fool. Number 15, rebellion against what? What is the concept here of rebellion? Well, you can't rebel unless there's something you can rebel against, and that which you'd rebel against is authority, is law. So here the individual is a lawbreaker. He not only is a violator of civil authority, but by virtue of the fact that civil authority is there from God, then he's violating God's authority as well. And a life of rebellion is what is the result of this evil life. Number 16, what is a whelp? A what? Offspring. And here the idea of being a young bear. And so you got a mother bear who is in pursuit of her lost cubs. It's not a situation you want to get in her way, for sure. Seen many hair-raising examples of this on television. Foolish indeed to get in the way of that situation. Number 17, can you think of any Bible example of people actually rewarding evil for good? Absolutely. I mean, the very personification of that proverb is the persecution of Christ. And of course, by extension, everyone following the example of Christ is in essence doing the same thing. Faithful children of God, disciples of Christ, faithful Christians, Stephen, you know, they all fit in that category of at the same time being treated bad but providing good for that. Number 18, the lesson in verse 14 is don't begin strife, or it may end up in just a plain old war. Okay? The figure, of course, it's used here as a crack in the dam, you know. Now, far back as I can remember, you know, got this little boy, and here he's got on wooden shoes, so obviously he's in Holland or Netherlands or whatever it's called now, and he's got his finger in the dam, and this torrent is going to come and wash him down the valley, you know. Such is the idea attached here. Number 19, the wicked are to be condemned and not what? Not praised. You don't justify those that are truthfully in a position of being condemned. And along that same fill-in-the-blank mentality in number 20, the righteous are to be justified or praised and not condemned. And of course you would think, well, we don't even need to say that, but we do. Because we must constantly be reminded that when the pushing in the direction of upholding that which is wrong is opposed, then a person needs to realize, our brothers and sisters need to realize that we've got their back. You know, we're sometimes say we're behind them. They're way, way, way back behind them, but we are supporting what they're doing. Number 21, are there any Bible examples of justifying the wicked that you can recall? That's right. You're the man. You're the man. Every time there's a dishonest judge who is upheld, then you've got the very thing happening right here. Remember over in Exodus chapter 23, verse 7, it says, "Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and the righteous slay thou not, for I will not justify the wicked." And so if God's not in the position of justifying the wicked, then it'd be wrong for us to be in the position of justifying the wicked. And of course, before we can actually follow that instruction, we got to know what the right is so we can know what the wrong is. Do what? Pilate. Absolutely. Absolutely. Pilate's a good example of that. All right, number 22. How about some Bible examples of condemning the righteous? Jesus, for sure. And of course, if I stay over in the book of Daniel, then I got the four total Hebrew children, you know, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They were obviously condemned, even though they were righteous, by the ungodly people that they were living under. Number 23 is fool in verse 16, one who's mentally deficient or one that doesn't use his head. He's the one that doesn't use what God has blessed him with. He's got a mind, he just is not using it, so therefore practically he is a fool. Number 24, what kind of friends did the prodigal son have? We call them fair weather friends, don't we? You know, they're friends as long as you got money in your pocket. When the money's gone, then you realize, hey, they weren't my friends after all. They were just along for the ride. Number 25, what's meant by the word surety? All right, so what we'd call a cosigner, somebody that guarantees that something's going to be good for a loan or a payment. Number 26, what is meant by exalting one's gate? Sounds like there's a little bit of pride involved here. And of course, if a person is in a position of proudly displaying something they possess, maybe their boundary lines and how big they are, then don't be surprised if somebody takes affront to that and they want to fight, you know, because they feel that they've got to do the same as well, and so there's an occasion for strife to result. Number 27, what is a froward heart? And of course, this comes up, and we've answered this already twice, I think. All right, we got a froward heart, and of course the illustration here, an Arab on horseback is not an easily controlled tongue. That's the parallel. Number 28, what does fool mean in verse 21? Here again, the fool here is not one who's limited in his understanding, you know, mentally deficient or anything, but he's a morally contemptible individual and acts that way. And of course, there's numerous examples of individuals who would fit that category. Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons would. Absalom would fit in that category too. Number 29, how can one's attitude affect his health? Or can it? Well, Sure it can. And of course, the principle here is a merry heart does what? Does good. It's like a medicine. Imagine that. Now, if there ever was a time in which we needed to dig deep to find that resource within us, then now's the time. Of course, it's always been. But I dare say that very few of us could have prophesied of what we're dealing with now in this country in so many different ways that we are being pulled one way or another. Number 30. What is meant by out of the bosom? Well, there again, that means here's something that's hidden and it's brought out and it's a gift, it's a bribe. It's been concealed and now it's being brought forth for the purpose that you would use a bribe. Number 31, apply the life statement of verse 24 to the prodigal son. What is it about experience as far as teaching goes? Is experience a good teacher? Sure is, but buddy, it don't take no prisoners. You know, it is a very rude teacher, sometimes people say. But even, well. All right, number 32. A foolish son is what two things to his parents? He's grief and bitterness. There's no joy, no satisfaction in that type of offspring for sure. Number 33, what are some Bible instances of smiting the noble or punishing the righteous? Well, again, we got Jesus, obviously, or Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail, Acts chapter 16. And then we've got the last, right after the Beatitudes, or the last Beatitude, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 10, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And he goes on to say, don't think you're the Lone Ranger if that's what happens, because that's exactly what's happened to the faithful, including the prophets that lived before you. Number 34, what does it mean to spare his words? Right? You are careful about what you say. You use words discreetly. You know, when I had this surgery on my neck, and of course I didn't realize how far-reaching the consequences would be as far as singing and talking and all that, or eating and swallowing. But had a speech teacher that told me, Freddie, said that it'll get well if you will just only speak when necessary. Well, I mean that's a real good instruction, you know. Don't do any unnecessary talking. Well, then I've got to find out who's going to define that for me, you know. No unnecessary talking. Number 35. What does holding one's peace mean? It means just keeping quiet, you know. Sometimes you'll hear a person say, if you think it, you might as well say it. Obviously, that person's never been married. They are clueless as to the ramifications of such an idea as that. And some people would go so far as to say, if you think it, you might as well go ahead and say it. They obviously have never been married either. Yeah. All right, chapter 18. What kind of person do you visualize here in verse 1? Is this a dodo head, or is this a smart fellow? His is a wise man whose desire is to know no more. Number 2, what kind of person do you visualize in verse 2? The very opposite, don't you? Here's a fellow who's relying on himself alone. Therefore, he is a foolish individual without a doubt. Number 3, what does ignominy mean? That may not even be said right. Shameful. There's a word, infamy, infamous. A wicked person loses his good name by this type of life that is lived. Number 4, how are words supposed to be like deep waters? Meaningful. Well, they're very meaningful. You know, the source of good is deeper than the deepest ocean, wider than the widest, you know, all those characteristics that we oftentimes associate with wisdom. and such is the case with wise words. They are very beneficial. Number 5, what is the wellspring of wisdom? Where does wisdom originate? Obviously, it originates with God. So everything good comes from God. Therefore, the wellspring or the source of wisdom is God as well. Number 6, what verse in chapter 17 goes with this verse number 15? Or excuse me, verse 5. Well, it's back to that justifying the wicked and condemning the righteous that we studied back there in verse 15 and verse 26 as well. You don't punish the person that does good, and you don't withhold punishment from the person that does bad, regardless of whether he's a prince or a pauper. Same principle holds true. Number 7, were these strokes that he's referring to here, were they public stripes? They could be, and probably should be. You know, the emphasis placed upon correction that was properly engaged. And, you know, we was actually talking about this yesterday, son, over Dunlap. Back in the Old Testament, you know, when a person was guilty of a capital crime, the whole congregation was to observe the punishment for the capital crime. Now, what was that? What was the purpose of that? Well, I think a part of it was deterrent, don't you? You know, you see somebody getting their arm. Do what?
Truly educational.
It was educational, absolutely. Says, oh man, I want to keep my right arm. I don't believe I'm going to steal. You know, and of course, that was one of the justifications I used to use for watching movies like Dirty Harry. You know, because the bad guy always got his head blowed off. You know, but of course, when it came to other things, then that was a personal and a private matter. Number 8, are you aware? Wait a minute. Yeah. Are you aware of any personal instances where people's mouths have cost them their jobs, their marriage, their tranquility, and so on? And you don't even have to say, yes, it was me. You don't have to do that. But there's too many instances where that would be the case for sure. And sadly, that's the case. Number 9, what are these wounds that are spoken of here? Now, some translations won't have wounds. What does it have instead of wounds?
Mine says delicious morsels.
Delicious morsels. So somebody says, now wait a minute now. If you got delicious, and some translations have dainty morsels, and others have wounds. Well, the idea here is something that's easily swallowed, okay? If something's easily swallowed, a tale of a scandal that's taking place, and somebody's just, I mean, they want to believe it because it's exciting. It feeds the desire for bad to happen or trouble to come one person's way. So it's talking about the deepest recesses of a person's nature that is desirous of those things happening, and that's the only way I can get it to be synonymous with wounds. That's me. I'm limited in my intelligence anyhow. Number 10, how is a slacker a brother to a destroyer?
Doesn't do his best.
Exactly. I mean, they're in the same family, you know. One of these brothers in this family is destroying, while another is not doing anything but wasting time, not doing the best he can do. And the end result's the same. Number 11, how is tower used here? A tower is it's not like it's a fortress. That's the idea. A refuge, a place of complete safety is the tower of verse 10. Number 12, do the rich man's strong city and high wall ever fail him? They can, can't they? So this so-called safety position can in fact be invaded for sure. And of course, I mean, do you think that maybe the fortress that surrounded the rich man in Luke chapter 16 was impenetrable, at least to his thinking. Well, it probably was to his thinking, but it wasn't. And all them barns that the rich man of Luke chapter 12 had built to put all his stuff, he might have looked upon them as being impenetrable as well, but it wasn't the case at all. You can't trust in, Paul uses the term, uncertain riches. Here today, gone tomorrow. Number 13, what other passage in Proverbs teaches the same as verse 12? 16, 18. Pride goes before destruction, haughty spirit before a fall. Number 14, how is it folly to the individual mentioned here, verse 13? How can something be referred to as folly here in verse 13? All right, in fact, you don't take into consideration all the evidence. Therefore, you are answering the matter before you've got the full story, and so you come to a wrong conclusion that if you just waited a few minutes or maybe hunted a little bit further, then you'd see yourself clear to the truth of the matter. Number 15, how is it a shame to this individual?
It may cause him to be held in ridicule for one thing.
There's a phrase that we use sometimes: a person sticks his foot in his mouth. Well, that's the idea, I think, here. When a person speaks out of turn and without sufficient evidence, then lo and behold, don't be surprised if you have to step back and punt or try to get the attention off of you for sure. Number 16, what would a doctor get out of in verse 14? All right. There was a song, if I'm not mistaken, a song, I think it was by the Bee Gees. It was "How Do You Mend a Broken Heart?" That was the song. And it was, of course, it was a favorite of women, hated by men, but it did teach a significant fact relative to something that's impossible to cure with medicine, but it can be accomplished.
Depression comes very close to that too.
Absolutely. And of course, right now, we're being told that cases of individuals taking their own lives is just astronomical in the midst of all of this stuff. And exactly. I mean, oh, I know it. And when you see the pictures of children and grandchildren standing at windows, looking in the windows at their grandparents or great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, it's just heartbreaking. The whole idea, if the cure is worse than the disease, then we'd rather have the disease in some respects. Number 17, what are the parallels here in verse 15? Absolutely. You got the contrast between the person that's desirous of becoming wiser and the person who doesn't seek knowledge at all. Number 18, name the Bible examples of such gifts as are mentioned here in this particular instance. A man's gifts make room for him, bringeth him before great men. Now, of course, if it was female, I would see automatically the Queen of Sheba right here in this picture. She had access to Solomon, and of course she'd had access if she hadn't brought all this stuff with her, but nonetheless, they were gifts nonetheless that provided a way in, an opportunity for this closeness to happen. It opened doors. And right now, again, it's like today's news, how much open doors are sold. If I can get an open door to, well, I'm not going to go there. Number 19, what lesson should church leaders learn from this first statement in verse 17? He that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbor cometh and searcheth him. Of course, that wouldn't just be for church leaders, it'd be for all of us. Now, the idea is just because you hear something first doesn't mean it's all that you need to hear about that particular situation.
There are a lot of people who would perhaps make a statement that's beneficial to them, even if it isn't necessarily true.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. They may even know the whole truth, but it makes them look better if you don't exactly divulge all the truth, just this little part here. And of course, that's a temptation that faces us all. But when the person says one story is good until the next story comes, and then it's not near as good, you know. Number 20. How does and why does the lot end contentions? Now, of course, keep in mind we're talking about the divine intervention in making decisions. Once God makes a choice, it's not up for speculation anymore. It's done been made. If a divine decision has been come to, then there's no reason for any strife over that decision. It's settled. And of course, in a very real sense, we apply the principles of the Scripture. And when we come to a decision based upon what the Bible teaches relative to a matter, then it should put to a stop any contention too, for sure. Because God's Word is just as steadfast and sure as He is in His person. Number 21, what lessons should Christians gain from the first statement, verse 19? A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city.
That was by Jesus taught in parables.
Exactly. He spoke in parables to conceal the truth from the enemies of the truth and reveal the truth to the friends of the truth. All in the same way. Isn't that amazing? That's one of the demonstrations of Him being God. So if a person has the tendency to offend his brethren, then don't be surprised if that might be harder to fix than some big thing, you know, on down the line. Harder to repair is the idea here. Man. That's right. It's harder sometimes dealing with brethren than it would be to atheists out here on the street, sadly. Number 22, is the first statement of verse 20 true whether his words are good or bad? A man's belly shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth, and the increase of his lips shall be filled. Is that proverbial Hebrew parallelism? Well, of course, you know. Our words are oftentimes shaped, whether good or bad, based upon the experiences that we've faced, and maybe the recent experiences has a tendency to temper our words a certain way or not. But we have to accept the consequences regardless of whichever one it is. If we're guilty of doing the speaking out of haste or out of disgust or out of anger or whatever it is, we still have to face the consequences of it, for sure. Number 23, give examples of death and life that are the result of how the tongue has been used.
Sounds like false witnesses, among other things.
Absolutely. You know, one of the most difficult things that I have observed is when false testimony is used to put somebody in the pen for life, and then later on when it's found out, and maybe even the person that provided the false testimony admits they're lying, then it's still almost impossible to get the person out of the pen. You know, that's not good. When a court pronounces someone guilty, then they should be guilty, you know. And of course we know that there's human judgments that must be made, but when you got crooked judges and crooked lawyers and through the tongue, then sometimes all you got to do is just make the accusation, and it doesn't have any basis in reality at all, and you've ruined the reputation of an individual from now on, sadly.
Unfortunately, it can also be because you don't know all the facts.
Exactly. Exactly. They answer a matter before they know the facts.
It can be innocent as well as malicious.
Exactly. It certainly can. It certainly can. And so here the idea, I think associated with this is the best and the worst of human beings can come out with their mouth. Now, the very best.
That's also why in the old law took two witnesses.
Exactly.
It wasn't just one, almost hearsay.
That's right. Exactly. There was wisdom attached to that requirement for sure. Number 25. No, excuse me. Number 24. How might some misapply verse 22? Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing and obtaineth favor of the Lord. How could somebody misapply that?
Find somebody else's wife.
That's right. Says, oh man, you mean I settled for this? You know, I mean, I've even heard guys say, well, she wasn't my first choice. If my first choice ever gets available, then we're joking, Carla. We're just joking here. We're joking out there in the radio land. Number 25. When do the poor use entreaties? But here, I think here what we're talking about is in reality a paradox. You got a poor or a rich borrower who is wanting to borrow money, and so if they're in the position of desiring to borrow money, then they're going to be nice, and if they're on the other end of the spectrum, then they're not going to be. They're going to be rougher in that regard. Number 26. Why do the rich answer roughly? I mean, what's the idea of rough anyhow? What would be a synonym for roughly here? Could be rude, rudely, and of course, oftentimes it's the case when the rich are in the position, then they are able to get by with that because of the money. You know, they're able to treat people like that, and they are able to hire the best lawyers to get themselves off of the problem where a poor man doesn't have that opportunity. Number 27, when might the first statement of verse 24 be true? A man that hath friends must show himself friendly. That's all the time. All the time. One who truly is a friend is concerned with our well-being in all aspects, physically and spiritually. That's what a true friend is. And a true friend like that sticks with you through thick and thin. Number 28. What friend of David seemed to be closer to him than a brother? Obviously, it was Jonathan. Their relationship was certainly a testimonial to their both love and appreciation for God's will and God's way of doing things. Excuse me. Chapter 19. What is a synonym for integrity? If a person possesses integrity, they're honest. They can be depended upon. They're sincere, and it's attached to who they in actuality are. Number 2, why is it not good to remain ignorant? Somebody said, you know, they prayed, we're thankful for being ignorant, and we just hope we can get more ignorant. And then somebody said, the days of miracles have passed. You couldn't get no more ignorant than you are right now. Yeah. No, God holds us accountable. You know, the times of this ignorance God winked at did not hold mankind physically responsible at the time, but now commandeth all men everywhere to not keep on being ignorant, but to repent. Number 3, is all haste sinful or just some haste? Some is. You know, I'd say when Ananias went to Saul of Tarsus and said, what are you waiting on? He was saying, you've got to hastily get up and be baptized and wash away your sins. You know, he wasn't letting him dilly-dally around. So when there's a divine instruction involved, then don't waste haste to do whatever it is. Number 4, when does the heart fret against the Lord? When are times when people have a tendency to not think in a positive way towards God and His will? It's not in good times usually, is it? It's in difficult times. When problems arise, when calamities happen, when something happens that we didn't think was going to happen, or if it was going to happen, is going to be way out in the future, and we'd be able to handle it better. And so, tendency so many times for people to get angry with God, which is, of course, crazy. Number 5, when is a poor person separated from his friend? Well, we mentioned that a while ago. It's when his friend runs out of money. Number 6, what class of persons likes to make friends of the wealthy? Those same fair weather friends. Sometimes the term that's attached to individuals like that is leeches. You know, they'll suck you dry of your money, and of course that's wicked. Number 7, will it be God or man who will do the punishing? Maybe both, and should be both in such an instance. Number 8, if everybody is a friend to the person who gives gifts, why don't all people love God? Because he gives the greatest gifts there ever were. Well, that's a question for the masses, isn't it? You know, can a person outgive God? No. Can man live in an ungrateful manner? Absolutely so. The older I get, the more I start to see that probably the greatest sin that mankind is guilty of is being ungrateful. It's not appreciating what God has made available to us. And it shows up in all types of bad ways. Number 9, what kind of words does he use as he pursues these people? He's hunting them down, and he's pleading with the what? He's pleading using truth. Pleaded truth. Number 10, in what sense is love used in verse 8? Is it agape love, or is it more an affectionate type of love? It's like a commitment, but not in the deepest form of agape. Number 11. Why should verse 9 and 5 both be included in the same chapter? You know, that's sort of a crazy question.
In both cases, it's a false witness.
All right. In both cases, you don't have all the information. You got false witnesses. The truth is not being stressed. And so the unrestrained enjoyment not associated with truth is going to be the result each time. Number 12, what is inappropriate as identified in verse 10? Of course, the idea here is here's an individual who doesn't have a whole lot of sense, or is wicked in his accomplishing or accumulating of stuff, then that just doesn't go together. Luxurious living and foolish people. It's just it's a contradiction for sure. Number 13, what does it mean to pass over a transgression? If you pass over a transgression, that simply means what? You overlook it. You know, you make a transition after sin's taking place, don't pay no attention to it. Number 14, based on number 12, what are the contrasts that he uses here in verse 12? All right, you got wrath and you got favor. You got a lion's roar, and you got the refreshment of morning dew. You know, well, that's clear contrast for sure. Number 15, what 2 sources of trouble can a man have in his own house? I hate to bring this up, but wife or children, sons, daughters, and wife. That can be what happens. And of course, for the wife, it can be husband and children. For the children, it can be mama and daddy. Number 16, how does a prudent wife act? Prudently, obviously. She is a wise individual. And she is truly, no overstating the fact, she is truly a gift from God. And her husband recognizes that unless he's a fool. Number 17, what is slothfulness? laziness. And a person, sometimes they'll tell you just exactly what they are when they tell you they're killing time. Well, don't brag about wasting time and idleness. Number 18, what is the meaning of he that despiseth his ways shall die? Excuse me.
Those who ignore God, refuse Him, face eternal punishment.
All right, so ultimately the end result of a person who persists in such attitudes and action, doesn't obey the wills and way of God, is going to be eternal punishment for such an individual. Number 19, how and when will God repay him? Well, sometimes you pay a few payments here, but ultimately, internally, for sure. Number 20, how does one chasten his child? What does it mean to chasten? Discipline. It takes into account the training, the teaching, the nurturing, the education, and you do that while there still is what? Well, there's still hope. Well, there's still hope. Now that points to the possibility that there will come a time when it won't do a bit of good. There will come a time when it's past hope. About 15 or 16 years old. That's spoken from experience. And experience is a very hard teacher. Carla said so. Y'all, we're going to have to stop right there. It's 10 till, and we'll pick up right there, the Lord willing, next week.